You're walking through unfamiliar territory. You've been tracking game for 3 days, further from camp than your group has ever gone. And then you smell smoke that isn't yours. You hear voices that don't belong to anyone you know. And through the trees, you see them. Other humans. Same eyes, same hands, same fear frozen on their faces that's frozen on yours. Neither of you has a word for what's happening because this has never happened to either of you before. What do? For most of human history, that single moment, two strangers locking eyes across a clearing, was one of the most dangerous encounters a person could survive. And the way it usually went down is not what you'd expect. Here's the first thing to understand. Your brain was never built to meet strangers. For almost all of human history, people lived in bands of maybe 15 to 30 individuals, and they knew every single one of them. Every face you saw in your entire life belonged to someone you'd grown up with, hunted with, shared a fire with. There was no such thing as a stranger walking past you on a street, because there was no street, and there were almost no strangers. So when two groups of humans who had never seen each other actually collided, they weren't running into an inconvenience. They were running into a category of experience their brains had almost no framework for. And the evidence shows their brains reached for the fastest, oldest answer available. That group is not us, and not us has historically meant not safe. You can actually see this pattern preserved in language. Look at the names hundreds of indigenous groups around the world have historically used for themselves, and a strange thing shows up again and again. The Inuit called themselves the real people. The Diné, who outsiders call the Navajo, call themselves the people. The Ainu of Japan, their name simply means human. Over and over, across continents that never had contact with each other, group after group picked names that essentially meant we are the humans, which quietly implies something darker about everyone else. If your own name for your tribe means the people, then whoever you meet in that clearing isn't automatically a person yet. That's not an insult invented later. Anthropologists think that's one of the oldest psychological defaults our species has, and it's still sitting in your skull right now, quietly deciding who counts as us before you've even thought about it. So when two groups actually met, the default setting was fear, and sometimes it stayed fear all the way to violence. In 2012, archaeologists excavating a site called Nataruk in Kenya uncovered the skeletons of 27 people, and the injuries told a brutal story. Fractured skulls, embedded arrow points, hands bound before death. This is widely regarded as some of the oldest direct evidence of group violence between human bands, dating back roughly 10,000 years, and it's not an isolated case. Utsi, the 5,300-year-old frozen man found in the Alps, didn't die of exposure or old age. He died from an arrow shot into his shoulder from behind, almost certainly fired by another human being. First contact between strangers for a huge stretch of human history had a real chance of ending in exactly the way your instincts are telling you it did. But here's where the story stops being simple. Because if every single first meeting had ended in violence, we would not exist the way we do today. Somewhere along the way, something had to override that fear, because the archaeological record is full of proof that groups who had never met were absolutely finding each other, and not just to fight. Obsidian tools have been found hundreds of miles from the nearest volcanic source. Seashells turn up in campsites nowhere near an ocean. Amber gets traded across entire mountain ranges. None of that happens by accident, and none of it happens through war. That kind of trade only works if strangers found a way to stand in front of each other and not immediately reach for a weapon. So how did total strangers turn a first encounter into a trading relationship instead of a massacre? Anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer societies still living this way today have found the answer, and it's almost embarrassingly simple: marriage. Researchers studying groups like the Juhoansi and the Kalahari have documented something called exogamy, the deliberate practice of finding partners outside your own band.
A 2014 study published in the journal Science, led by researcher Kim Hill, mapped out the social ties across dozens of hunter-gatherer bands and found they were woven together almost entirely through marriage links between people who weren't blood relatives. One wedding between two strangers from two different groups didn't just create a couple, it created an alliance. Suddenly, the group across the clearing wasn't a threat, it was family, your child's grandparents, someone with a reason to warn you about danger instead of causing it. Marriage was quietly one of the most important diplomatic inventions our species ever came up with, and it likely started with exactly the kind of terrified first meeting we're talking about right now. And once trust was built once, it built roads for everything else to follow it. Shared rituals, traded stories, borrowed tools, and borrowed words. Some linguists believe entire language families spread this way, not through conquest, but through generations of intermarriage, slowly blending two-group speech into something new. The clearing where two frightened strangers once stood facing each other with weapons half raised could, a few generations later, be the exact spot where their grandchildren spoke the same language and worshipped at the same fire. Which brings us to something that should genuinely unsettle you. This isn't ancient history locked safely in the past. In 2018, a man named John Chow attempted to make contact with the Sentinelese, an isolated tribe living on North Sentinel Island in the Indian Ocean, who have avoided sustained contact with the outside world for thousands of years. He was killed almost immediately. Not because the Sentinelese are uniquely violent, but because they are doing exactly what every human band has always done when an unknown figure appears without warning. They are running the oldest program humans have: assume danger first, ask questions never. It's not a relic, it's still fully operational right now on a small island most people have never heard of. And it's still operational in you, too, just aimed at smaller things. The tension you feel walking into a room full of strangers, the instinctive judgment you make about someone before they've said a single word, the relief you spot one familiar face in an unfamiliar crowd. That's not random social anxiety. That's the same ancient machinery that once decided, in the space of a few heartbeats in a forest clearing, whether the person in front of you was going to become family, a trading partner, or the reason you didn't make it home. Every stranger you'll ever meet gets processed for half a second by a brain that's still somewhere underneath the manners and the small talk, checking whether it's safe to lower its guard. Tomorrow, you'll meet someone new, at work, at a party, on the street, and for one flickering instant before your conscious mind catches up, an ancient system will run the same calculation it's been running for 300,000 years. Friend or threat? Us or them? The clearing is gone. The program that decided what happened in it never left.